It's World War II, and Allied ships are crossing the ocean, bringing supplies to help Britain. Meanwhile, the sailors on these ships live in constant fear. In fact, many are so scared they don't even take off their life vests when they sleep. They have good reason to fear, for beneath the waves lurks one of Germany's most terrifying weapons, a 200-foot metal tube that can suddenly surface and tear their ships in half. They are called U-boats. In 1942 alone, German U-boats sank about 1,200 Allied merchant ships that delivered supplies to Britain, almost 30% of the total. The Allies wanted to stop the U-boats' attacks, but their equipment was very limited. For example, the radar and sonar on their escort ships were so primitive that it was hard to tell a German submarine from a whale. However, in an unexpected way, help came from the sky, as aircraft did what the escort ships couldn't. They hunted the German submarines and turned the tables in a twist no one saw coming. For U-boat crews, once the Allies learned to hunt their submarines, each patrol turned into a desperate fight just to survive. And tragically, out of roughly 40,000 men who served, about 30,000 never came home, a terrifying 75% casualty rate, meaning 3 out of every 4 sailors did not survive. And it was the highest casualty rate of any major branch in any military during the war. The story of Germany's submarines, from their terrifying effectiveness in World War II to their eventual costly downfall, has roots stretching back far beyond the 1940s. In 1851, a German inventor named Wilhelm Bauer built Germany's first real submarine. He called it the Brandtaucher, which means fire diver. Its first test dive in Kiel harbor was expected to be a great success. Instead, it ended in disaster. The Brandtaucher did not just have small technical problems, it sank instantly to the bottom. Worst of all, Wilhelm Bauer and 2 other men were trapped inside. They were 60 feet underwater, trapped in a leaking metal tube for 6 long hours. No rescue was possible. No one knew how to save a sunken submarine. Then came a desperate idea. Instead of pumping water out, they let more water flood in. As the boat filled, internal pressure rose until it matched the outside sea pressure. At that point, they forced open the heavy hatch and escaped. You'd think such a close call would end Bauer's dream, but it didn't. He remained obsessed with submarines. His early models, like the Brandtaucher, were pioneering yet flawed, and it would be 70 years after that dive before Germany's fearsome U-boats appeared. When World War I began, submarines were a new weapon. Germany's U-boats employed technology that was terrifying at the time, but had serious limitations. They were slow, and their electric batteries drained quickly, forcing them to surface often to recharge and take in fresh air. Surfacing left them exposed to attacks by enemy ships, anti-submarine nets, and even their own mines. These constant dangers led to a horrific casualty rate. By the end of the war, over 5,000 German submariners had died, about half of all U-boat crews. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles banned Germany from building submarines. This strict rule aimed to prevent Germany from using this powerful weapon again. But Germany's naval leaders and engineers refused to lose their submarine know-how. They knew these boats were vital and wanted to be ready for the future. So, they planned in secret, keeping their best design teams hard at work. These experts didn't sit idle. They refined old ideas and sketched new, better subs. To build and test their designs, they turned to other countries. They set up fake companies in the Netherlands, Spain, and Finland. These firms secretly made parts, or even entire boats, far from prying eyes in Germany. The Allied powers knew that much of this was happening, but mostly looked the other way since they no longer saw submarines as a serious threat. This hidden work paid off. When Hitler announced in 1935 that Germany would rebuild its navy, they did not start from zero. They already had experienced designers, skilled workers, and proven plans ready to go. Years of shadow preparation gave them a clear head start for the war to come. By the time the Second World War began, Germany's submarine technology was terrifying. Some U-boats, especially the long-range Type 9S, were enormous, over 250 feet long from bow to stern. These underwater hunters had incredible range. They could cross the Atlantic, patrol off the American coast, and return home without refueling. They could also dive almost 750 feet below the waves to stay hidden. But inside, 44 to 52 men lived shoulder to shoulder. Personal space didn't exist. sailors bumped into one another constantly. The air stank of diesel fuel, body odor, stale food, and often the sharp tang of vomit from seasickness or fear. Privacy was impossible. Only the captain had a small curtained corner. Everyone else ate, slept, and worked in the same cramped compartment, always in view of their shipmates. Bunks were always in use. When one man went on watch, another, just coming off watch, slid into his warm bunk. Escape from this nightmare wasn't possible either. The military code was strict. Surrender meant a court-martial and possible execution. The horrors often began during training. Learning the technical details, how the engines worked, how to fire a torpedo, was essential. But the real challenge was surviving weeks or even months cramped inside an old active U-boat, in the relentlessly suffocating conditions that mimicked a real patrol. This harsh drill was designed to weed out the weak. It pushed many trainees to their absolute limit. After Britain declared war, the U-boat's main job was to cripple Britain's supply lines. They attacked Allied ships in the vast, unforgiving Atlantic Ocean. The plan was simple and harsh. They wanted to starve Britain by cutting off the food, fuel, and raw materials it needed to feed its people and keep fighting. The Allies knew how dangerous these German submarines were. They fought back hard. They hunted the U-boats without stopping. Day after day, Allied ships like destroyers and corvettes, along with aircraft, searched the ocean and sank many U-boats. But Germany did not stop building new submarines. They kept sending more and more crews into the dangerous Atlantic. The Allies realized the real challenge. Winning this battle wasn't just about sinking some submarines. They had to sink them faster than Germany could build new ones and train new crews. These U-boats were clever machines for their time. When they were on top of the water, moving fast over long distances, they used powerful diesel engines just like a truck. But under the water, they switched to quiet electric motors. This let them move without making much noise. They were very, very hard to find. They also carried acoustic torpedoes. That means when a torpedo launched, it listened for a ship's propeller noise and then steered toward it. Some U-boats became deadly experts at this game. U-48 alone sank 51 enemy ships. But they didn't always hunt solo. They often used Rudel tactic, the Wolfpack tactic, gathering in groups to surround a convoy and strike from all sides. To be successful, the U-boats had to hide. They only came up to the surface for short times, to breathe fresh air for the crew, to run diesel engines to recharge their batteries, and to send radio messages back home. The fear these U-boats caused was very, very real. Winston Churchill, the British leader, said that the danger from the U-boats was the only thing in the whole war that truly made him feel afraid. These boats sank ships of all sizes. The biggest ship they ever sank was the RMS Empress of Britain. It was enormous, over 42,000 tons. And the danger wasn't just far out in the middle of the ocean. Sometimes these U-boats operated near the coast of Britain. People on the shore could see the smoke or explosions as ships were sunk almost within sight of towns. Back in Germany, the news of these victories was huge. People cheered loudly, as if their favorite team had won a major game. Certain U-boat commanders became famous across the country, almost like movie stars. Names such as Gunther Prine and Otto Kretschmer were known everywhere. Because of these early wins and the cheering crowds at home, a powerful idea grew. People began to believe these submarines could win the entire war by themselves. They called the U-boats a kind of magic weapon. The simple idea was this: sink enough British ships, and Britain would run out of everything and have to give up without anyone having to invade their island. But behind this bright public picture, shown on screens and in newspapers, lay a different, much darker truth. Hunting German U-boats in World War II was a relentless battle of wits, machines, and endurance, and Allied forces had to piece together a system to find and kill these hidden enemies beneath the waves. Hunting a U-boat on the surface was vastly easier. The truly difficult job was finding and tracking it when it was hidden deep underwater. This is where aircraft became the essential key, acting as the vital eyes flying high above the water. How could anyone find a submarine hiding deep beneath the waves from the sky? It seemed impossible, but these boats often gave themselves away. Sometimes they leaked oil, leaving a visible trail on the surface. Spotting such a sign from a plane was the crucial first step. Once the airplane saw this clue, it could guide ships towards the exact spot. Just the presence of this hunter, the ship, or the plane, was a weapon in itself. It forced the U-boat to stay submerged to avoid attack. Remaining deep underwater, however, had harsh consequences. The air inside the boat grew stale and made breathing difficult. The hunters knew this. They would stay with the U-boat, following it for hours, sometimes even days, using sonar to keep track. This constant pressure exploited the submarine's limits. Eventually, worn down and desperate from the terrible conditions, the U-boat was often forced to surface. At that moment, the tables turned. Destroyers and frigates would immediately open fire with their main deck guns, concentrating shells onto the submarine's relatively thin hull and conning tower. In less than a minute, that submarine, which only moments before had been safely hidden below the waves, was destroyed, and its crew drowned. The lucky ones were captured. Not every U-boat was sunk by the enemy, however. Some were lost due to catastrophic malfunctions, or some sank by hitting mines they themselves had laid earlier. This could happen due to shifting currents changing the mine's position. That once terrifying weapon, so feared for sinking enemy ships, soon found itself under relentless chase. The hunters had become the hunted. Allied technology advanced rapidly. Radar could now spot U-boats in bad weather or at night, and improved sonar made it easier to track them underwater. Aircraft and ships hunted without pause, inflicting heavy losses on the Germans. This led Berlin to order U-boats built faster than ever. But rushing the work and using cheaper materials caused many to break down, leak, or lose power before they even saw the enemy. Life inside these U-boats was awful. Fresh food, like bread or meat, quickly ran out, leaving the crew with nothing but bland, canned rations. Sometimes, after many weeks underwater, seaweed and small shells would grow on the submarine's hull. This attracted small fish that would scrape and eat them. Inside the boat, in the small space, the scraping noise became very loud and slowly drove the men inside crazy. For men already submerged for weeks without seeing the sun, constantly struggling against fear, this noise added to the strain. The most terrifying sound, however, was the enemy sonar. Hearing it meant detection, and detection meant the end. This was the harsh reality for the men serving in the U-boat fleet during the later years of the war. Trapped in a noisy, leaking, stinking metal tube, hunted from the sea and the sky. Out of roughly 40,000 men who served, about 30,000 never came home. That's a terrifying 75% casualty rate. Imagine an entire branch of service losing 3/4 of its people. This wasn't just high, it was possibly the highest casualty rate of any major branch in any military during the war. Most of the men who did survive the war only did so because their boat was captured and they were taken prisoner. Back home in Germany, the strong early optimism, built on real early success, made the later truth even harder to face. When the sheer scale of the losses finally leaked out, often through unofficial whispers, or simply the lack of any success reports to replace the old triumphant news, civilians felt a profound shock. Thanks for watching.